time, shall leave Boulogne harbour at sunset tomorrow, free and unmolested, if you, on the other hand, will do your share. I don't know yet what my share in this interesting bargain is to be, sir, but for the sake of argument let us suppose that I do not carry it out. What then? Then, Sir Percy, putting aside for the moment the question of the Scarlet Pimpernel altogether, then Lady Blakeney will be taken to Paris, and will be incarcerated in the prison of the Temple lately vacated by Marie Antoinette. There she will be treated in exactly the same way as the ex-queen is now being treated in the Conciergerie. Do you know what that means, Sir Percy? It does not mean a summary trial and a speedy death, with the halo and glory of martyrdom thrown in. It means days, weeks, nay, months perhaps, of misery and humiliation. It means that, like Marie Antoinette, she will never be allowed solitude for one single instant of the day or night. It means the constant proximity of soldiers, drunk with cruelty and with hate, the insults, the shame. "You hound! You dog! You cur! Do you not see that I must strangle you for this?" The attack had been so sudden and so violent that Chauvelin had not the time to utter the slightest call for help. But a second ago Sir Percy Blakeney had been sitting on the window-sill, outwardly listening with perfect calm to what his enemy had to say. Now he was at the latter's throat, pressing with long and slender hands the breath out of the Frenchman's body, his usually placid face distorted into a mask of hate. "You cur! You cur!" he repeated. "Am I to kill you, or will you unsay those words?" Then he suddenly relaxed his grip. The habits of a lifetime would not be gainsaid even now. A second ago his face had been livid with rage and hate. Now a quick flush overspread it, as if he were ashamed of this loss of self-control. He threw the little Frenchman away from him like he would a beast which had snarled, and passed his hand across his brow. "Lud forgive me," he said quaintly, "I had almost lost my temper." Chauvelin was not slow in recovering himself. He was plucky and alert, and his hatred for this man was so great that he had actually ceased to fear him. Now he quietly readjusted his cravat, made a vigorous effort to reconquer his breath, and said firmly, as soon as he could contrive to speak at all: "And if you did strangle me, Sir Percy, you would do yourself no good. The fate which I have mapped out for Lady Blakeney would then irrevocably be hers, for she is in our power, and none of my colleagues are disposed to offer you a means of saving her from it, as I am ready to do." Blakeney was now standing in the middle of the room, with his hands buried in the pockets of his breeches, his manner and attitude once more calm, debonair, expressive of lofty self-possession and of absolute indifference. He came quite close to the meagre little figure of his exultant enemy, thereby forcing the latter to look up at him. "Oh, yes," he said airily, "I had nigh forgotten, you were talking of a bargain, my share of it, eh? Is it me you want? Do you wish to see me in your Paris prisons? I assure you, sir, that the propinquity of drunken soldiers may disgust me, but it would in no way disturb the equanimity of my temper." "I am quite sure of that, Sir Percy, and I can but repeat what I had the honour of saying to Lady Blakeney just now. I do not desire the death of so accomplished a gentleman as yourself." "Strange, monsieur," retorted Blakeney with a return of his accustomed flippancy. "Now I do desire your death very strongly indeed. There would be so much less vermin on the face of the earth. But pardon me, I was interrupting you. Will you be so kind as to proceed?" Chauvelin had not winced at the insult. His enemy's attitude now left him completely indifferent. He had seen that self-possessed man of the world, that dainty and fastidious dandy, in the throes of an overmastering passion. He had very nearly paid with his life for the joy of having roused that supercilious and dormant lion. In fact, he was ready to welcome any insults from Sir Percy Blakeney now, since these would be only additional evidences that the Englishman's temper was not yet under control. "I will try to be brief, Sir Percy," he said, setting himself the task of imitating his antagonist's affected manner. "Will you not sit down? We must try and discuss these matters like two men of the world. As for me, I am always happiest beside a board littered with papers. I am not an athlete, Sir Percy, and serve my country with my pen rather than with my fists." Whilst he spoke he had reached the table, and once more took the chair whereon he had been sitting lately, when he dreamed the dreams which were so near realization now. He pointed with a graceful gesture to the other vacant chair, which Blakeney took without a word. "Ah!" said Chauvelin with a sigh of satisfaction. "I see that we are about to understand one another. I have always felt it was a pity, Sir Percy, that you and I could not discuss certain matters pleasantly with one another. Now, about this unfortunate incident of Lady Blakeney's incarceration, I would like you to believe that I had no part in the arrangements which have been made for her detention in Paris. My colleagues have arranged it all, and I have vainly tried to protest against the rigorous measures which are to be enforced against her in the Temple prison. but these are answering so completely in the case of the ex-queen, they have so completely broken her spirit and her pride, that my colleagues felt that they would prove equally useful in order to bring the Scarlet Pimpernel, through his wife, to an humbler frame of mind." He paused a moment, distinctly pleased with his peroration, satisfied that his voice had been without a tremor, and his face impassive, and wondering what effect this somewhat lengthy preamble had upon Sir Percy, who through it all had remained singularly quiet. Chauvelin was preparing himself for the next effect which he hoped to produce, and was vaguely seeking for the best words with which to fully express his meaning, when he was suddenly startled by a sound as unexpected as it was disconcerting. It was the sound of a loud and prolonged snore. He pushed the candle aside, which somewhat obstructed his line of vision, and casting a rapid glance at the enemy, with whose life he was toying even as a cat doth with that of a mouse, he saw that the aforesaid mouse was calmly and unmistakably asleep. An impatient oath escaped Chauvelin's lips, and he brought his fist heavily down on the table, making the metal candlesticks rattle, and causing Sir Percy to open one sleepy eye. "A thousand pardons, sir," said Blakeney with a slight yawn. "I am so demmed fatigued, and your preface was unduly long. Beastly bad form, I know, going to sleep during a sermon, but I haven't had a wink of sleep all day. I pray you to excuse me." "Will you condescend to listen, Sir Percy?" queried Chauvelin peremptorily, "or shall I call the guard and give up all thoughts of treating with you?" "Just whichever you demmed well prefer, sir," rejoined Blakeney impatiently. And once more stretching out his long limbs, he buried his hands in the pockets of his breeches, and apparently prepared himself for another quiet sleep. Chauvelin looked at him for a moment, vaguely wondering what to do next. He felt strangely irritated at what he firmly believed was mere affectation on Blakeney's part, and although he was burning with impatience to place the terms of the proposed bargain before this man, yet he would have preferred to be interrogated, to deliver his either-or with becoming sternness and decision, rather than to take the initiative in this discussion, where he should have been calm and indifferent, whilst his enemy should have been nervous and disturbed. Sir Percy's attitude had disconcerted him, a touch of the grotesque had been given to what should have been a tense moment, and it was terribly galling to the pride of the ex-diplomatist that with this elusive enemy, and in spite of his own preparedness for any eventuality, it was invariably the unforeseen that happened. After a moment's reflection, however, he decided upon a fresh course of action. He rose and crossed the room, keeping as much as possible an eye upon Sir Percy, but the latter sat placid and dormant, and evidently in no hurry to move. Chauvelin, having reached the door, opened it noiselessly, and to the sergeant in command of his bodyguard, who stood at attention outside, he whispered hurriedly: "The prisoner from number 6. Let 2 of the men bring her hither back to me at once." End of chapter 25.